Welcome to You and the Law. I'm Steve Cilente.
And I'm Bob Lally.
Today's topic is, what do you do if you're involved in an automobile collision? Bob?
Well, this is a very interesting topic, and I think very timely, because the times which we live in, we depend on automobiles for transportation. I mean, you just take a look at some statistics. It looked in 1998. That's going back a ways. It's going to be higher than that, but I found that back in 1998, 6.3 million police reported motor vehicle crashes. And that's in the United States. And 1/3 of those resulted in injury.
I know in California the statistics are no better than they are throughout the United States. I did a little quick research myself. The most recent I could come up with is 2005. But in 2005, there was a traffic collision that occurred every 59 seconds, so less than 1 minute. There was an accident somewhere in the state of California. The number one factor that came up in 29.1% of them was speed. Speed was obviously is a problem. And of the California licensed drivers, 22% were under the age of 30, or over the age of 30, and those under the age of 30 comprised more than 37% of the fatal and injury accidents. Young people want to know why their rates are so high? That's why.
In 2001, nearly 42,000 people died on America's roadways.
And as we talked about in another show, in Calaveras County last year, I believe that there were 5 alcohol-related fatalities. Alcohol, speed, both certainly added fatalities, and this can be a very traumatic thing for a family. Just being in an accident, whether or not you're injured or someone dies, accidents can be bad.
Well, then I like to call them collisions, because usually somebody wasn't doing what they were supposed to. Do you have a different opinion about that?
Coming from a law enforcement background, I've always said accidents, and we also refer to them as TCs, or traffic collisions. The acronym doesn't make any difference, or what you call it. Something happened, a vehicle got into a collision or an accident, whether it's a solo vehicle or involves many vehicles, as we see on the freeways, particularly in the fog.
Right, and so we have to know that motor vehicle collisions or accidents, they have become part of our everyday life. That is something, just like on another show we talked, DUIs could happen to any of us, anytime, any day, and very likely to happen at some point.
If a person gets into a collision, I'll go with your term.
Thank you.
What do they do? Whether they're at fault, not at fault, what types of things should they plan on doing?
Well, one of the first things you want to ascertain, is it going to be property damage or is somebody injured? So you want to check to see if somebody's injured right off the bat. And I'm going to talk about some very specific things that I think should be done. I've kind of made a list here, but first thing you have to do is check to see if anybody's injured, because things will differ a little bit if somebody's injured. Some things will say the same, some will differ. But you want to establish ownership of the other car. That's one thing. And the name on the registration, you want to see if that's different than the owner. In other words, if the driver is the same as the owner.
Let's go back a little bit.
Okay.
Certainly, the very first thing that you want to do if you're involved with another vehicle or it's a solo vehicle, in other words, just you, and you've got passengers, make sure that everybody is okay. Is anybody injured? If so, immediately call 911. If there's nobody that's injured, then you may want to hold off for a few minutes, let the dust kind of settle for a moment before you call law enforcement. But my position has always been, if you're involved in an accident, I don't care how minor, you call law enforcement. Let them do an official report.
Well, that takes care of a couple problems, because if it's property damage over 500, you're supposed to report it to law enforcement or the DMV, but it also protects you against any accusations of hit and run later on as well.
When you're talking about $500 in damage, I can't think of a dent you can put in your vehicle today that's not going to cost you more than $500.
I don't know why they've never adjusted it, but I can't even think of a ding.
Yeah, not a simple ding at all.
Right.
So you ask for the person's driver's license, you exchange driver's license information, registration information, and now we're all supposed to have insurance and have a card that says, I'm insured.
Yeah, let me talk just for a second about establishing the ownership of the vehicle. And the reason you want to do that is you want to see if there's a relationship between the person that owns the vehicle, if he's not driving, and the person that's driving the vehicle. And I'll just get off. You want to see, because a governmental entity may be involved, may be the owner of that vehicle, and or a neighbor or a parent-child relationship. And if the person driving was doing something for that person, it may be that both is responsible. And usually the insurance travels with the owner of the vehicle first.
But isn't it also true that the driver has a responsibility, whether or not they're owner of the vehicle, to make sure that that vehicle is insured before they drive?
Oh, yes, yes. In California, we have, I think it was Proposition 213. And that meant you have to have insurance, and there's a really huge consequence. There's not a real criminal consequence, but civilly there is. If you don't have insurance and you get in an accident, say you get seriously injured.
I disagree on the lack of a criminal consequence, because if you get a citation for no insurance, that citation runs between $700 and $1,000 for not having insurance. Now, the court often will reduce that fine if you get what we call after-acquired insurance. In other words, insurance after you got the citation. So I think that there are significant
That is.
consequences.
I'm thinking of a civil mode, and I got to shift gears a little bit. I appreciate that very much. The civil thing, though, about it is if you don't have insurance, you cannot recover your general damages. Now, that's a technical term. I'm going to talk a little about what it is. That's pain, suffering. That's what you go through. Say if you have a broken leg, the pain and the suffering, and say you have a scar on your face as a result of the collision that's going to be with you for the rest of your life. That's part of the pain and suffering too. But you can recover your special damages, which is what we call like your lost wages, property damage and things. But the majority of the recovery, if there is a serious injury, is going to be in this area of pain and suffering that we use in our system. We use a monetary value to compensate.
And that speaks to the importance of why you have to have insurance. In the state of California, if you're driving, you've got to have a car, you've got to have insurance for that vehicle. And what type of insurance, in your experience, Bob, is the minimum amount of insurance a person should have, and is there an upper limit as to how much they should carry?
You need to protect yourself. And you need to assess your situation in order to protect yourself. But everybody is driving around California, almost everybody, with the minimum requirements of 1530, which doesn't cover much if you get in a collision.
What do you mean by 1530?
Okay. That means you can recover $15,000 per incident, or no, $30,000 per incident, $15,000 per person, but not the aggregate over $30,000.
It's a little technical.
It does. It does. It gets even more technical. You can protect yourself by, when you purchase your own insurance policy, by getting higher limits and not signing off on what's called the uninsured motorist provisions. Say you had a 1530 or the person at fault, and you were injured, and you had a severe injury, and the value would be, say, $100,000. Well, you could collect the first 15 from the person that injured you, or was at fault, I should say, and then you turn around and you make a claim against your own insurance company for the difference, and they get a credit for that first 15.
Then there's such a thing as underinsured motorists.
Well, that is underinsured,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
All right.
But if there's no insurance at all, you can go directly for the whole thing against your own insurance company.
We often run across these problems where people are not sure about what kind of coverage they should have. Absolutely talk to your insurance agent. I know a lot of people, they want very low deductibles because they don't have the income to handle a $500 deductible or $1,000 deductible. But we see people, so many people out there with 15, 30 coverage, they get in an accident, and again, like other things, the cost of medical care as well as the cost of repairing your own vehicle far exceeds any coverage of 1530, correct?
Correct. It generally does. One of the interesting points about the uninsured motorist coverage is, say, let me give you an example because it applies out of the, comes into play when there's an injury from the use of an automobile. And as an example for that, let's say a girl was roller skating on the sidewalk and a car comes along and that car is uninsured and hits the little girl. Well, that little girl or her parents on her behalf can bring a claim against their own insurance company under the uninsured motorist. So you don't have to be in the car.
Now, all of this sounds like we're going to sue. Everybody's going to sue. Are people sue happy today?
That's an interesting question because a lot of people think that and believe that, but people don't realize that people really do get injured in these automobile collisions. It's a real thing, and people have to live with the injuries. And in our system of justice, and that's what it is the way we do it is we don't allow people to go over and take it out of somebody's hide. We do it monetarily. And that is the sole purpose for insurance, is to spread the risk. So we have insurance for a reason. And we should use it if it's available to us.
I've seen some cases where the medical damages exceed $300,000. And I know today if you get life flighted somewhere, I think it's around $20,000, very, very expensive. And most of us, certainly not me, are going to write a check to pay off those medical expenses. And that's what I have insurance for. But should a person talk to a lawyer? They get in an accident, well, let's back up. The first thing that they need to do is to report it to law enforcement. And most insurance companies want you to report it within a period of time. And where, if at all, should they be talking to a lawyer?
Well, one thing you mentioned before I jump into that, and that is the medical insurance. And that is a whole area of law unto itself. Because if your medical plan pays for your medical, or even if you have MedPay on your auto policy, they're going to turn out and they're going to have their hand out and they're going to want a big chunk of your recovery for that lien. And the custom is the lawyer usually tries to get those liens reduced, which we're not going to talk about, and then as part of his fee, but then he turns around and gives it to the client. And that's generally what we did. And I can tell you, I know of a $1.2 million lien that was reduced to zero in a particular case. So it can be done. I think I got off track on your question. I'm sorry.
Where should a person talk to a lawyer, if at all?
This is one area of the law where you get a free consultation. Any personal injury lawyer is going to give you a free consultation. The reason is it's going to be handled on a contingency fee. The attorney will advance the costs if you have a meritable claim, and he's going to put those costs in, personally put those costs up front and advance them until the close of the case. And the contingency fee is generally run to 1/3 to 40% if it's not in litigation, from 40 to 50% if it is in litigation, if a complaint's filed. It's important to know that your contract with the attorney is negotiable. But we've talked about where to find an attorney before, and that is word of mouth. But one thing I really noticed, and I was really surprised lately, is that I've noticed a lot of quality personal injury lawyers now advertising on TV and the phone book. Really quality attorneys doing that.
I won't go there. I don't do television advertising.
It's an interesting trend, though.
It's interesting, yes. Certainly in Calaveras County, you can go to the website of calaverasbar.com, see if any attorneys there are listed under personal injury, and there are other websites certainly you can look for. But
you want to get a history on the attorney, too. You want to know a little bit about them before you go and see them if you can.
And we previously talked about win-loss rates and stuff. There's no way to statistically do that. In fact, most personal injury cases don't even go to litigation, correct?
Oh, no. Much different than the criminal cases. It's very unusual for a personal injury case to go to litigation. Most of them are settled early on. You will get to a thing called a mediation where the parties try to agree and they have somebody that assists them do that. And most resolve in what's called an arbitration, where if they can't agree, the person hearing it is going to, like a private judge, is going to make a decision. And then it can be accepted or rejected, and then there's financial consequences depending on who you are and if you accept or reject it. But the cost is just prohibitive. It's just prohibitive. It would not be unusual 10 years ago if you had a case that went to trial to have at least $25,000 in costs the attorney would have to put up to do it.
No, well, they advance those.
That's right.
Those costs, pay off certain things, may have to hire experts and so forth. And if, in my understanding, the way I've done it is if you lose the case, you take it to litigation, you lose, you may, as the attorney, be stuck with all of those expenses.
That's right. Eat the costs. So we try to take the cases that are meritorious. But the other interesting thing is that whatever the costs are going to be taken out of the client's recovery. So what you want to try to do is keep the cost to as low as you can, so that people have a recovery.
Right.
And that's why we try to avoid litigation.
You're there trying to get something for your client because of their injuries and possibly have future pain and suffering and so forth. But let's back off the litigation for a little bit.
Sure.
Because a lot of people are not going to be dealing with the litigation. Get back to the accident. In this case, let's talk about preparing for the accident. What if I get in an accident? I understand that 3A, for instance, has like a packet that they put together.
Yes, I think it's called Docu-Accident or Docu-something. It's about 1995 and contains certain items like a flashlight, a reusable camera, and things like that. But everybody should keep an emergency kit in their glove compartment and be prepared for this situation. This kit should contain one thing, a cell phone. An operating cell phone, you should check it, so that if you have to call law enforcement authorities or for medical care or your family, pen and paper for taking notes, the insurance information, that type of a digital camera for taking pictures. You want to take pictures of any damage to the vehicles, or if there's injuries on the spot, you want to get a picture of those. Now, we're not being, suing conscientious, like we're sue happy here. We're just preparing for the inevitable.
I think the acronym is CYA. And
yes.
I won't say what that is. One of the things that I think it's important for everybody to understand, certainly report it to law enforcement. When you call 911, you may not be getting someone on the other end of the line who knows the area that you're in. If you say, we're just past the Smith home on Highway 49, you may be talking to Sacramento, you may be talking to Stockton, to dispatchers who are not familiar with the area. Give cross-street references. I'm at Main Street and Highway 49, or in San Andres, Churchill Street and Highway 49. Try to give your location as best as possible. Be patient with the person that you're talking to. Number one, you need an ambulance, don't need an ambulance. They're going to ask you if anybody's injured. But try to be patient explaining where you are, because the dispatcher is going to give that information to an officer on the street, and you've got to be clear as to where you are. Try not to panic. Be as calm as you possibly can.
Just a couple other items I wanted to note is you should have a card with your medical information if you have any special medical conditions or known allergies, and a list of contact numbers so you do know who to call.
Those things can be very important. What if you're unconscious, or the person that's involved in the accident, the other driver's unconscious? Are they wearing a wristband that's a medical alert or some other type of thing that the officer's going to look through their wallet? Don't you be doing that. Make sure you've got any medical cards that are there that a person can reference. The EMTs or the ambulance people are going to look for, because if you're allergic to certain medications, you want it where they can find it and don't give you the wrong things and complicate your injuries.
Exactly, exactly. Now I want to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about the actual exchange of information itself, because you are required to exchange information. Name, address, phone number, the insurance policy. Of course, you got your proof of insurance card in your car with you. You're supposed to have that anyway. Your insurance policy number and a driver's license number. Not your social security number. You don't have to give that up. It's not required, and you should not give that up.
And a lot of that information's on your insurance card, the policy number, et cetera. I don't think anybody can be required to know that number. Bob is correct. Be prepared to exchange that information. If you don't, you could have future problems. Now, what if a person's in a parking lot and they back up and trash somebody's grill because they weren't looking when they backed up? Do they have to sit there and wait? What do they do?
Well, you want to make sure that the proper person is notified. You could leave a note on the car. You would get the license number, and maybe one thing you should do is you need to file the police report in any kind of a collision. So I think in that situation it would be appropriate. You know, you can't stay there for 5 days, so you might want to leave a note on the car and then actually file a police report, and always inform your insurance company right away.
One of the local agencies I'm aware of in one of our small communities between Ambler and Calaveras, there are certain type of accidents that they will hand you the form, let you fill it out on the accident report. And that's because mirrors, with cars parked so close to the street, and particularly truck mirrors, they have a tendency to wipe out mirrors on parked cars. And some law enforcement agencies will say, here, you fill out the form and we'll file it. They may not necessarily call a law enforcement officer. But there we're talking about strictly a property damage and not an injury. And
I've always wondered about that. Where's the line kind of drawn as to when a law enforcement officer is going to come out?
they make that determination.
Okay.
The law says you've got to report it. They have to take the report, but whether you fill it out or they fill it out, it's up to them. So they may just, if you say that, geez, I ran off the road, I hit a rock, or went through somebody's fence, they may just tell you, come in, who are you, come in, file a report. It's up to the agencies.
Now, let's say the law enforcement comes out. What about talking to law enforcement?
Well, my position is certainly you give your name, rank, and serial number, but there's always that fine line between, let's say you knew you blew through a red light or you blew through a stop sign. You know you're at fault. There's absolutely no question. Do you admit that to the officer? And I'll say, play that by ear. The officer may or may not be able to figure it out, but certainly don't lie to them. Not talking to them is different. If you say, I think I better talk to a lawyer first, that's completely different from lying. Because if you get caught in a lie, that is a violation of the law, and it could cost you money and a criminal conviction.
Right. You're not required to answer them, but you don't need to tell them. And as a matter of fact, I have a little different perspective on it, and that is you may not want to answer that question. And never, if you're in a collision, admit to fault at the time, whether you think you are at fault or not. For example, we'll move on a little bit to talking to insurance carriers.
Go right ahead.
Never make a statement to the other person's insurance carrier. That insurance agent is not there to help you.
I know that one time that I actually was in the state of Nevada, I got rear-ended sitting at a stop sign because the person behind me was intoxicated, and we're about 10 cars back, and the light turned green, and that person thought that, oh, the light's green, I can go. Well, the problem is nobody in front of me moved, so I got rear-ended. And when I got a call from the other agent, and they said, I'm going to tape record this phone call, and I said, no, you're not. And that means they could not tape record me. I knew what I had to say, but it was my personal preference not to be tape recorded.
You should actually call and speak with your own insurance carrier first. Initially, you want to be careful in doing that because you may be in an uninsured motor situation where you're actually making a claim against your own insurance company. But you need to talk to them and tell them what happened. And, they have insurance companies now that actually come out to the scene of the accident when there's a collision. So you can call them. That's why you got the cell phone in your compartment.
That's why I understand that some insurance companies are now doing that. They literally come to the scene of the accident and try to take everything down. And obviously, certainly if you're not at fault, that's good for you because they're getting the information fresh. And for all intents and purposes, maybe the insurance company be prepared to settle it right on the spot.
Well, I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to do that. I think I'm going to say that 3 times. I don't want to do that because injuries, particularly soft tissue injury, when I'm talking about soft tissue, I'm talking about a herniated disc that could be a very serious injury. And that may not show up for a week or 2 or even longer. So, you want to make sure you keep your doctor appointments.
One of the things that when I think about doctor's appointments, I've talked to clients or prospective clients, I'll say, they said, well, I've been a chiropractor, but they've never been to the emergency room. They just went straight to a chiropractor. And I know that a lot of insurance companies get real unsure when it's just a chiropractor's been involved. I'm not doubting chiropractors know what they're doing, just as some insurance companies, from my experience, would just as soon you went to a regular doctor first and let them do the referral to a chiropractor.
Red flags go up. Red flags go up. In fact, I won't say which company, but one company puts all these elements into a computer and it spits out what it thinks the value of your case is, and they try to settle for it. And that's one of the values that brings it down.
Well, we're getting close to conclusion here. I do know that insurance companies do track different doctors, chiropractors, attorneys that they've dealt with. And if they've dealt with a problem attorney, a problem chiropractor, at least in their mind, that may affect the settlement.
Absolutely. There's one thing I really want to mention here. I don't want to get off the show without saying this. And that is, if you're in a collision and it's a minor collision, no serious injury, try to get off the road and clear the road. I know you covered that, and one of the reasons is because if you cause a collision and there's a second collision, you could be responsible for the people injured in that second collision.
Now, law enforcement officers don't really want you to move the car, but certainly you've got to weigh moving the car, taking obstruction out of traffic, particularly in the rural areas like Calaveras County, because you may be in an accident right on a curve that poses a danger to other cars who have yet to arrive. So you have to kind of weigh the situation as to where you are.
Correct. And if there is a serious injury, you should stay in the car, keep your seatbelt on until help gets there.
Okay. So what do? Call law enforcement, exchange information.
Notify the insurance company.
And your attorney.
That's right.
Thank you very much for joining us on You and the Law.